It's often said that the greatest speech ever delivered was Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. In less than 300 words, Lincoln's tribute to the sacrifice of those who died in the cause of freedom drilled into the heart of the American spirit. It was a landmark in human expression, not just for its lyrical beauty, but because it spoke directly to Americans about their national identity. Because it focused on the great American dedication to the pursuit of liberty and sacrifice in the cause of freedom, it touched all Americans. It still does. Ben Chifley's Light on the Hill speech was just a little bit longer, 484 words in total. But Chifley's thoughts on the nature of the Australian labour movement are, in many ways, our equivalent of the Gettysburg Address. When Chifley spoke of bringing something better to the people and praised those who gave freely of themselves to advance the circumstances of others, he was outlining the great Australian Labor Party's mission statement. But the Light on the Hill is not only about the ALP. It's a mission statement for the entire Australian people. Chifley's emphasis on selflessness, compassion and social justice speaks directly to all Australians about our national values. Values like the fair go, the rejection of entrenched class divisions, equal respect for the highest of achievers and the most humble of battlers, and our concept of community that's so recognisable in great regional communities like Bathurst. Indeed, Chifley's modestly stated aims promote the concept that while individualism might provide us with financial rewards, what Australians really seek are the greater rewards that come with living their lives to their fullest potential. And that is so much more than simply advancing our personal interests. Australians want to be part of something bigger than themselves, something that speaks to their deeply held values. That spirit encapsulates the light on the hill. It extinguishes the darkness of self-interest. It illuminates what Abraham Lincoln himself referred to as the better angels of our nature. It resonates deeply with a people who pride ourselves on egalitarianism and mateship. That's why so many people invoke Chifley when they refer to Labor as the party of the light on the hill. They understand its power. Labor's call for collectivism, progress and shared prosperity is much closer to the values held by most Australians than the individualism that so excites the Conservative parties. When Labor gets it right, we have a compelling narrative. Tonight, as we think about Ben Chifley and his contribution to our nation, I'd like to offer some ideas about how Labor can make sure we get it right now and into the future. The Conservatives have provided us with a clear example of how to get it wrong. They admitted as much this week by knocking off the most negative leader I've seen in my time in Parliament, in Tony Abbott. Mr Abbott had a plan to get into government. He did not have a plan to govern. And for that reason, there was no sense of purpose or narrative to the government. For them, the attainment of power was the end in itself. The change in the Conservatives' leadership doesn't change that fundamental problem that goes to the core of their values. And it is clear from Malcolm Turnbull's first days as Prime Minister that he has put his personal ambition ahead of his convictions in critical policy areas including climate change, renewables, water sustainability for the Murray-Darling Basin and marriage equality. We all know what Mr Turnbull has said about these issues in the past, but he has exchanged those principles for the keys to the lodge. I believe policy and intellectual integrity matter in public life. Mr Turnbull has sacrificed both to become PM. In doing so, he has given up the authenticity that Australians are desperately seeking from their political leaders. These actions also represent a significant breach of trust from the legitimate expectations that people had of Mr Turnbull. Labor has always performed at our best when our policies target the aspirations of the Australian people. And those are aspirations that have motivated generations. They're pretty simple. Above all, Australians want to ensure that our children had better opportunities than we enjoyed. They don't want a free ride, but they do expect a fair go. They want a chance to make something of themselves in life without artificial impediments like the circumstances of their birth or other factors outside their control. Understanding these basic aspirations, the concerns that families have around the kitchen table must always sit at the heart of Labor's thinking. While our opponents seek to empower the individual, we dedicate ourselves to the many, not just the few. Our opponents believe that if the state just gets out of the way, everyone will be better served. Labor seeks office so that we can use the power of the state to intervene, to make a real difference to people's quality of life and their access to opportunity. If we see a barrier to fairness, we are prepared to use that power of the state, to use government to make a difference. In the words of Ben Chifley from the Light on the Hill speech, he said this: "I try to think of the Labor movement not as putting an extra sixpence into somebody's pocket or making somebody Prime Minister or Premier, but as a movement bringing something better to the people, better standards of living, greater happiness to the mass of the people." Our long history, of course, is adorned with great leaders, from Chris Watson through to Curtin and Chifley, and on to Gough Whitlam, Bob Hawke, Paul Keating, Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. Our record speaks to our ideals. We build in a real sense through the delivery of great infrastructure. Think of Ben Chifley's Snowy Mountain scheme, the Transcontinental Railway, the major national highway network, and more recently, the National Broadband Network and the creation of Infrastructure Australia, to name just a few. While others talk about infrastructure, Labor built it. But Labor's most cherished capital project has been building up the social capital of the Australian people. We empower Australians with education and training, delivering opportunity and unlocking human potential. We introduced universal health care, building in people that sense of security that comes with knowing that if they become ill, they will receive care, whatever their financial needs. We built the social safety net. We built the social safety net that ensures that all people, regardless of their economic means, are treated with the dignity that we regard as a birthright. Indeed, when you consider all of the game-changing social and economic reforms in our nation's history, they were delivered by Labor governments. Action on climate change, childcare, education, fair industrial relations, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, compulsory superannuation. Labor is also the author of the great statements of national leadership that have helped Australians come to terms with our past and set the scene for a better future. Once seen, that great photograph of Gough Whitlam pouring red soil into the hands of Vincent Ngari can never be forgotten. And my proudest moment as the leader of the House of Representatives was when Kevin Rudd rose to deliver the historic apology to our stolen generations. In 2015, as we prepare to write the next chapter of the great Labor story, our history must be our reference point. We must always deal with the urgent needs of present circumstances. We must always be looking to anticipate the future, and by doing so, help to create that future. A future where people come first. While this principle has guided my political engagement, I was struck by a Qantas billboard when travelling through an airport just this week. It depicts a Qantas pilot saying, "I don't just fly planes for a living, I fly people, and there's a difference." Well, indeed there is. It's a powerful message that shows that keeping people at the centre of the business equation is just as critical as putting people first politically. And tonight I want to raise 5 points that encapsulate a plan for an approach that puts people first and can drive the agenda of the future Labor government. They're 1, future job creation and the economy. 2, developing our cities and regions. 3, building communities. 4, advancing equity. And 5, environmental sustainability. Firstly is jobs and the economy, because building a strong economy is a core responsibility of government together with the private sector. For Labor, however, a strong economy isn't the end in itself. It's about creating jobs for Australians. It's about generating the national wealth to fund nation-changing reform. As the resources sector moves from the construction to the production phase and beyond, the current government has failed to identify and prepare for the jobs of the future. Our location in the fastest growing region of the world gives us an advantage. China and India have increased their economic size by 6 times in just the last 2 decades. In just 1 decade, the Asian region will account for almost half of the global economy. Our superb natural environment is another advantage. But our biggest advantage, of course, is the ingenuity and creativity of our people. We must identify future opportunities now and create policy frameworks that facilitate the realisation of those opportunities, including the provision of education and skills appropriate to these future jobs, high-value manufacturing, infrastructure development, financial and legal services, food and agricultural production, tourism, renewable energy, information technology, urban design, the arts and creative sector, education and health services are all sectors primed for expansion. The shift to a carbon-constrained global economy provides extraordinary opportunities if we simply end the distraction of the climate skeptics in our national discourse, accept the science and move on. Australians have been responsible for some of the world's greatest advances, from Wi-Fi to the bionic ear and breakthroughs in solar and wave technology. What we haven't done as well is maximise the commercial opportunities that these advances have made possible. I don't want to see an Australia where our ingenuity is used without there being a national economic benefit. Australia stands at a crossroad when it comes to the nature of future job creation. We reject, as the Labor Party, the idea that the way in which we should compete in our region is by lowering our wages and conditions. We must create high-value jobs that allow for a continued improvement in living standards and fairness in our workplaces. And we need to understand that while Australians want jobs, they don't want their jobs to rule their lives. They want to retain room to meet their commitments to families, to friends and to communities. Otherwise, we start to feel like units of production rather than human beings. For our political opponents, the nature of employment is solely about meeting the needs of business. The current government goes even further. It is prepared to destroy Australian jobs as though an individual's job security is meaningless. There is a stunning example of this phenomenon in my own shadow portfolio of transport. It's in Australia's economic, environmental and national security interests as an island continent to maintain a vibrant domestic shipping industry. Yet legislation before the Parliament would allow foreign ships to compete on domestic routes paying third world wages. This is a case of unilateral economic disarmament that no advanced nation in the world accepts. And yet evidence before the Parliament in the last fortnight from Mr Bill Milby of North Star Cruises, a businessman operating in the Kimberley, confirmed that when he asked, how can I compete on this basis, he was told and advised that he had two options. One was to go out of business. The second option was to replace the Australian flag with a flag of convenience from a third world country on the back of his ship, replace his Australian crew with foreign crew on foreign wages, and that would also mean that he didn't have to train Australians for those jobs. The Australian flag on the back of our ships should not be replaced with the white flag when it comes to Australian jobs. And we need to balance the legitimate hope of business to reduce costs with the legitimate aspirations of working people to have proper, decent wages and conditions so that they benefit as well from economic growth. The current government, of course, is not interested in shaping our cities and regions. And this is evident in their approach to traffic congestion, which has been exacerbated by a major shift that's underway in the patterns of work in our cities. In previous decades, jobs growth was strongest in the outer suburbs of big cities close to affordable housing. But this is changing. The rise of the digital age has meant that jobs growth has been concentrated in service industries like insurance and information technology, which are based in inner suburbs. This has resulted in longer commuting journeys for average workers. And it is indeed a tragedy that many working parents spend more time travelling to and from work than they do at home with their kids. The suburbs of Middle Australia are being transformed from lively communities where people lived, worked and played into drive-in, drive-out suburbs where people can afford a home but can't find a job. The problem here isn't simply inconvenience. Here we have literally millions of people watching their quality of life drifting away like the white line in their rear vision mirror. And the current government is doing nothing. It sees no role for itself in urban policy or the provision of public transport. But when Labor returns to government, we'll begin a major attack on the problem of traffic congestion. That isn't just about building toll roads. It's about investing in public transport. But it's also not just about the big capital cities. It's about what we do to harness the ability of our regional cities and towns like Bathurst to take some of the development pressure off the major cities. Many Australians stuck in the traffic jams I just referred to would happily consider moving to regional Australia for all of the lifestyle advantages that you understand. What they need is the confidence that they'll be able to find work in those regional areas and access the services that are available in capital cities. That's why Labor is focusing heavily on boosting regional development and promoting quality of life through close attention to urban policy. We must strengthen regional centres by working with local businesses to promote jobs growth. We must also focus on the consistency of the quality of government services across the nation. I'm not just talking about schools and hospitals, but tertiary education via well-resourced regional campuses of universities and also vocational training. Infrastructure is also critical. If we hope to see rural and regional Australia take some of the pressure off our capital cities, they need to be linked to those cities by good roads and critical railways. And I'll give you an example. The recently opened regional rail link in Victoria allows commuters from Ballarat, Bendigo and Geelong rapid access to Melbourne CBD on a rail link by separating it out from the suburban rail network. It is a game changer. People can now get from those regional cities into Melbourne CBD to Southern Cross Station quicker than they can from many of the outer suburban areas in Melbourne itself. The regional rail link was the largest ever Commonwealth investment in a public transport project, opposed by the Conservatives, delivered by Labor. It's projects like this and the high-speed rail network that would have enormous benefit for regional Australia that can make an enormous difference. And the most important way to boost regions in the digital age is by ensuring that the national broadband network delivers the same high-speed network to regional Australia that it will in the capital cities. It needs to connect to every home and every business. A half-baked second-rate NBN of the type being delivered by the current government not only shortchanges cities like Bathurst, it shortchanges the entire nation. Australians do want stronger communities. They understand that rapid changes that are a constant in the 21st century risk isolating people from each other in a personal sense and seriously damaging the community fabric. Governments have a role to play in strengthening communities. I'm not just talking about grants for community festivals. I'm talking about focusing on quality of life through traffic congestion. I'm talking about working with councils on urban design to ensure that our cities evolve in ways that promote a sense of community by providing opportunities for the interaction with others that most of us crave. Designers pay great attention to the look of new apartment buildings, but to promote healthy communities, we need to think more about the design of the spaces between those buildings. We need better designed cities and towns, more public transport and better roads. We need support for the arts and encouragement for local councils, which ensure that strong community interaction. And every small community in Australia, not just the big cities, from Bathurst to Bamaga, adds something to our nation by providing Australians with a home base for their broader activities and a context for their lives. Governments need to value communities as more than simply places where houses exist. They are people's homes, places where they live, work and play. A future Labor government will provide policy leadership to the states and local government and collaborate with both so that the great gains this nation has made in personal prosperity in recent decades are backed up with commensurate enrichment of community life. Our task will begin with addressing the drive-in, drive-out suburb phenomenon, but we can also do other things. The best place to start is to work with local councils, as I did as local government minister, through programs like the Regional and Local Community Infrastructure Program, the Regional Development Australia Fund. In this region we delivered, for example, the upgrade at Mount Panorama, the refurbishment of the Chifley House that I had the honour to visit earlier today, expansion of Orange Airport, the upgrade of the Orange Aquatic Centre, but also major projects like the Great Western Highway upgrade and the Orange Bypass. A Commonwealth government that listens to communities about their needs rather than seeking to impose upon them some outcome dreamed up by the bureaucrats in Canberra stands the best chance of enriching community life. The next Labor government must also address inequality. Whilst growing income inequality is central, there are also aspects of social inequality. That's why a Labor government will legislate for marriage equality within 100 days of our election. It's why we will promote racial equality by getting on with the referendum to recognise the first Australians in our Constitution. It's why we'll enhance universal health care and promote a higher education system in which wealth does not predetermine access to self-improvement. It's why we'll deliver high-speed broadband based on fibre to homes and businesses. Australia needs broadband, not broadband. That means fibre, not copper. And that means universality of service regardless of where you live. Otherwise, those who can't afford it won't have access to the tools of social mobility. That's not only unjust, it's just plain stupid, because it will limit this nature's future economic growth. High-speed broadband is to today's generation what access to water and energy was to previous generations. We also need to be concerned with equity measures in taxation. We'll require the big multinationals that fill their coffers off the backs of Australian consumers and workers to give something back by actually paying tax in this country rather than playing accountancy tricks to send their profits offshore. We'll also consider the introduction of a buffet tax, which I moved at National Conference, which individuals will be required to pay a minimum tax rate beyond which they can't reduce their exposure with tax deductions. The Buffett rule is named after American billionaire Warren Buffett, who found to his shame a few years ago that his accountants had arranged his affairs so he was paying less tax than the secretary who did his diary. It's not on. We must do something about it.
Tax the rich.
We also need to deliver gender equity by escalating the battle against domestic violence. This, of course, can't be done just by government. It must be done by the entire community being mobilised to address what is a national crisis. Striving for equity is central to the Labor mission. It cuts across just about every policy area, and that's why it must be at the heart of everything we do. The fifth theme of the Labor government must be sustainability, because there is no greater intergenerational issue than the environment. The current government's refusal to take serious action on climate change not only isolates us from the international community, but it also creates a situation where our inaction will impose costs on our children. Their prevarication and whining about taking any action will do nothing but kick the problem down the road for our children and our grandchildren to deal with. I don't want to leave my son and his children a massive bill to make up for the current generation's inaction on climate change. I want them to inherit a clean environment, a healthy Great Barrier Reef, an Australia that has invested in renewable energy sources. Labor must not be intimidated by our opponents into turning away from policies that focus on sustainability. We must argue our case. Sustainability must be promoted to the very centre of our policy considerations across the board. It's not just about the environment. It is about the way we design our cities and our communities. It's about the way that we use government intervention to promote sustainable industry. It's about transport policy. One crowded commuter train can take hundreds of carbon-emitting cars off the road. So public transport not only boosts economic productivity, it also provides an environmental outcome. In the future, Labor government should bring the concept of sustainability to the centre of policy making by considering the implications of all decisions. And of course, we must act on climate change. While the former Prime Minister became so irrational on this issue that he reduced this critical issue to arguing that wind turbines were ugly while coal mines were beautiful, most Australians understand the arguments for action. They also understand the opportunities that are there from supporting renewable energy. So, climate change is not some sort of international scientific conspiracy dreamed up by extremists who simply hate the mining and energy sectors. It's an economic issue, and that's why it was so important that when we were in government we worked with the workforce, including particularly to pay tribute to Tony Marr and the Miners' Union for understanding the need for transition and for a good policy outcome. If we do nothing, we might find down the track that the market for coal is shrinking and that our international competitors have cornered the market on clean energy technology. Or we can embrace change as an economic opportunity. There are fortunes to be made in emerging renewable energy sectors, but the current government has turned its back on the reality of change. We've already lost the first mover advantage, but it's not too late for a future Labor government to get things back on track. We don't underestimate the complexity of managing a transition from an economy where mining is a key employer to one where the influence of mining declines over time. But we need to manage the shift to renewable energy whether we like it or not, because we can't stop it. That's why Labor remains convinced that a market-linked mechanism is the best way to deliver genuine outcomes. Look, friends, it's hard not to conclude that Ben Chifley had such an extraordinary enthusiasm for his life's work, that he took joy in fighting the good fight on behalf of those who needed a hand. While I've got no doubt that Chifley was a political warrior, his real interest was in delivering progress. In 2015, we need to follow his example. For the past decade, I've watched the quality of political debate in this country deteriorate into hyper-partisanship and negativity. Tight electoral margins, the rise of the 24-hour media cycle, and the particularly combative approach of Tony Abbott have led the decline. I believe that Tony Abbott became so comfortable with being opposition leader, he failed to transition. He continued to remain negative rather than having any positive vision for the future, and that impacted the political culture in Canberra on a day-to-day basis. Malcolm Turnbull's repudiation of long-held political positions is also a win for tactics over policy and common sense. Mr Turnbull should take the opportunity to explore ways to collaborate to achieve real progress for our nation. There's one area he could start on. He could accept Bill Shorten's invitation to join him in a bipartisan national summit on addressing the domestic violence crisis. This should not be a party political issue. US actor Kevin Spacey, who plays the president in House of Cards, has reflected on this issue. He said this: "Partisan rancour and party politics and ideology have got in the way of compromise, and compromise is the only thing that has ever made politics successful." He's spot on. If the only language between politicians is the language of conflict, we'll make a lot of noise but less progress. Indeed, that is pretty much the story of the recently departed Abbott government. A lot of noise but no progress. Tonight I've tried to explain why I think Labor can and should return to government. But I know one thing: we won't return to government unless we put people at the top of our agenda. Putting people first requires that we speak to them respectfully, communicating with them in an authentic manner. We should look no further for inspiration than former US President John Kennedy. On the 15th of July 1960, as Kennedy accepted his party's nomination to run for the presidency, he declared, and I quote, "We are not here to curse the darkness. We are here to light a candle." Whenever I hear that Kennedy's quotation and its focus on bringing light to the political darkness, I am of course reminded of the quiet dignity and achievements of Ben Chifley. Chifley also didn't curse the darkness. He pointed to a better future, one in which people came first. Let me thank the Labor Party's Bathurst branch for giving me the great honour of delivering tonight's address. For me, being given such an opportunity is indeed a dream come true. But that is the thing about our great Labor movement. People's dreams can come true. A train driver can become Prime Minister. A lad who grew up in a council house with his single mum can become Deputy Prime Minister. 40 years after Chifley, the Manchester band, the Smiths, sang, "There is a light that never goes out." I've always wanted to work that into a speech. As long as the Australian Labor Party has true believers, such as you in this room, working not for yourselves but the advancement of our great nation, that light will indeed continue to be a beacon of hope for us all. Thank you very much.